Alright, so over the years I've gotten a lot of questions about PS3. Normally when it comes to buying for it, that would be things like recommended consoles to buy, games, accessories, controllers, storage options, things like that. And so let's finally do an ultimate comprehensive PS3 buying guide. That's this video. So use timestamps down below to jump to the points of interest that you want to know about, but other than that, let's get started. Let's begin with consoles. This is something where I think a lot of people probably already know the expected answer, but there is a lot to go over here. So at least initially, we can say that the most desirable units, they do tend to be the launch models in North America, that's CCH-A01 and CCH-B01. So these are the launch models in the US where the PlayStation 2 SoC is on the motherboard. It has both the reality synthesizer and the emotion engine built right in, ensuring extremely reliable PS2 playback that covers the majority of the PlayStation 2 library. And as a quick side note, CCH-B01 was sold in a lower volume and discontinued pretty quickly, so there's not many of these out there, but just note they do not have Wi-Fi and they also do not have the card readers for a compact flash, SD, and Memory Stick Pro Duo. So going for this model is really more of a novelty preference kind of thing, but there's those, and then shortly after, in North America, was model CCH-E, and in Europe, CCH-C. Now, these have principally the same shell as the launch models, but the emotion engine was removed for PS2 support, so you're going to lose some PS2 compatibility. How much? That varies. For the most part, it still covers the majority of the library, but absolutely there are some games that will not work, or they will work and they'll exhibit graphical artifacts. That could be things like missing textures, missing shadows, maybe sound cuts out, FMVs might not play correctly. It's a number of weird things that could pop up on a game-by-game basis, but you'll still be able to play most PS2 games. That, and as a little bonus here, but the smoothing filter for these models when playing PS2 games seems to give off a slightly more refined picture quality, so at least that seems to be the consensus for a lot of people, is that these models produce better looking PS2 games. But anyway, this is important because for PAL territories, this is your only option for PS2 playback. PS2 games and PS1 titles, which remember, every single PS3 model can software emulate PS1 games, so don't worry about that. But these consoles are region locked, or these games are region locked, right? So PS3 is region free, but PS1 and PS2 region locked. And I presume that if you're in Europe, you have a library of PAL PS1 and PS2 games. So your only option for PS2 games is CCH-C, which means your only option is a model that does not have the emotion engine. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, moving on. The subsequent fat model consoles now have no PS2 playback. These are the ones where they got rid of the chrome trim, so now it's more of a matte silver. Same for the top PS3 logo. And should you get one of these, well, let's move on before we really discuss that. So next would be the slim PlayStation 3. There's a lot of different model numbers for this, all with different storage sizes. These consoles are considerably smaller than the original model. They're a matte finish with a lot of different special console colors available as well, and they also use regular buttons for power and eject. The next model would be the Super Slim. That's at least the colloquial name, so model numbers for this are in the 4000 series. These consoles are even smaller, and they have some accenting gloss black trim with a matte finish, and again, a lot of different colors here that you can buy, but it's got a tray-like disc setup now instead of a slot-loading drive. So, now that we've covered everything, what's the best one to get? Now, as I've said before, the most desirable does tend to be the launch models for that PS2 playback, and absolutely, I've made the case before, those are the ones to get. But, and this is a big but, those early consoles are also the most unreliable. You have to be committed to maintaining one. So I love them, but this is something where it's kind of a laundry list of issues here. So the problems with those early consoles include, well, for one, they draw a lot of power. Even during PS2 or PS1 playback, they're very inefficient. Also, they hold the highest values. They're more expensive. And they're extremely complex machines on the inside. There's so many points of failure. They're 15 years old now, so if they've never been serviced, they need new thermal paste at a minimum, both on top of and underneath the IHS, and if they were serviced, as in they're missing their warranty sticker, you likely won't know the history. And trust me when I say a lot of people who touch these did not know what they were doing, or they were following bad advice on maintenance. The big thing is that these consoles have a 90nm cell in RSX. This is today the biggest failure point for these consoles. YLOD, or yellow light of death as a fault, is considered a general hardware failure, but in most cases it does point to a BGA problem with the cell or RSX. Over time, the lead-free solder balls can crack or unseat, caused by the heat, which can over time cause the substrate to expand, the board can warp, and that's going to bring a yellow light of death, which in order to fix that might involve a reball, and that's a process most people cannot do. You'd need a professional, and even that is not a guarantee. So yes, these are, as I've described before, the ultimate PS3. You can pair them with a PS5 and you've got 5 generations of compatibility at your fingertips, but admittedly you really should know. These require extra care and a willingness to maintain correctly. Now, if you don't want that headache, and I don't blame you, and you're just looking for PS3 games, this is where you want to focus on that big point of failure, the die size of the cell and the RSX. And this is probably a good time to remind people again that, because I was certainly a part of this before where I put out the wrong information, but it's not the NEC token capacitors. So for a while that was, some misinformation being put out there that, hey, it's not the RSX or whatever, but actually it is, and it always was, to be honest. The NEC tokens, they can fail, but that's anywhere from, a 5-10%, possibly a lot lower of a failure rate. So they can go, but that really just, it's sort of lumped into the overall complexity of the system where, again, there's so many failure points. But for the most part, it's always going back to the RSX or cell, usually the RSX. Now, going back, generally speaking, the smaller process size, the better. So that would mean the console is going to draw less power, it's going to generate less heat, and it will be more reliable. It's not going to be perfect, it can still fail, but smaller is going to be better here. So some of the later fat models have a 65 nanometer process for the cell and the RSX, so these are definitely a viable option if you just like that console design. But for slim models, series 2100 and up have a 45 nanometer cell and a 40 nanometer RSX. So now we're in a much better situation. All these are definitely worth looking at. For super slim models, some of these do still have a 40 nanometer RSX, but model number CCH4300 and any variation of it will have a 45 nanometer cell and a 28 nanometer RSX no matter what, so these are great options. There's also a relatively new mod that allows a smaller RSX process to be swapped onto the early models, but that involves a reball, so again, that's not going to be easily viable for most people. We'll certainly get into that in a separate video, but realistically, you're going to be okay with anything that's 45 and 40. It really comes down to a preference of slim or super slim, so that can be a design preference or maybe console size, which would go to the super slim. It could be power draw, which again, super slim is in favor there. Disk spin noise, that's something where the slim model isolates the disk spinning better in that machine more, but it's really that. It's a trade-off of, do you want to deal with the hassle and headaches and expense of the early models and reap the reward of how cool it is and it can play PS2 games, or do you want something reliable, just plays PS3 stuff, some PS1 games. It's a lot smaller, draws less power. It's really a trade-off like that you have to consider, but those are the models you want to look out for. Controllers. So for this, there's definitely some things to be mindful of, like for example, throughout the entire PS3 lifecycle, there's only 2 controllers, more or less, from Sony, which would be the 6-axis that was around launch. There's no rumble functionality in those controllers. They were only available for a short time, and then going into 2007, when Sony settled their lawsuit and their dispute with the haptic feedback company Immersion, that's when they added rumble to the DualShock 3, or they made the DualShock 3. The dead giveaway for these controllers on the market is that there's a label on the top of the controller. It'll say DualShock 3 and 6-axis. Otherwise, it'll say just 6-axis. Unless you care about the novelty of it, you don't need a 6-axis, and you're likely not going to really find one anyway. Most controllers on the market are DualShock 3s, and there's only some slight model variations there, but most of them are exactly the same. Now, you should also be aware of the fact that PS3 in general is very good at recognizing most controllers through the USB port. So by default, it can read most USB controllers and sort of just turn them into a generic controller. The only thing you'd have to be mindful of is making sure that there's a way to access the PlayStation buttons, so most controllers might not have that ability, so unless it's a specific third-party controller for PS3, then a generic USB controller might not be recognized. This would include a DualShock 4 or even a DualSense, which you can use. Now, when it comes to actually buying a controller, I really want to make this clear. You want to be careful that you buy a real one and not a fake one. So this is a topic that we've covered before when it comes to fake controllers on eBay. They're also on Amazon, probably Mercari, but there's a lot of Chinese sellers that are selling brand new DualShock 3s at $15 to $20. It seems like a good deal, but they're fake. They have awful dead zones. They're cheap. They don't feel good, which you can buy them, but you really want to avoid that. And so I'm actually going to show you in real time, because this is what people tend to ask about when it comes to these controllers, right? And so a normal search term that most people would probably do is just PS3 controller, right? And right away, fake, well, obviously fake, but things like this are pretty misleading. This looks just like a real DualShock 3, right? It's got the packaging and everything. $19 coming out of the Philippines. These are not real. So you want to avoid general search terms like PS3 controller, which might also be an easy way to find a real one, but here's the words we really want to look for, where it says genuine PlayStation 3 OEM, which is original equipment from the manufacturer. So granted, it doesn't look all that good, but this is what I would normally search, is DualShock 3 OEM. And here's where we now have nothing but real controllers. And if you're really, sketched out about eBay, and I totally get you if you've been burned before, but eBay's got, a great system in place where you can have buyer protection, look at a seller that probably has more than 1,000 transactions. That way, they're probably some sort of business where it means a lot to them. And, you can reach out to the seller if you're unhappy with your order or something. That's normally what I would do if you're really a little bit too nervous, right? There's 600 transactions here, mostly positive, I'm assuming, but $28. The premium for a used DualShock 3 is in the neighborhood of $25 to $30. And if you do want a new one, so yeah, we would type in OEM new, and this is where you can't really avoid it. If you want a brand new DualShock 3, the premium is at least $100 or somewhere around there. The neighborhood of that price is going to be much higher for, let's say, older DualShock 3s in this original like plastic shell. But there's really no getting around that. So if you want a brand new one, that's what you're going to have to do. But for the most part, that's pretty much it. Also, probably we should at least mention for the internal batteries on these controllers, because they use lithium-ion batteries. If it goes, it's not too hard to change. It's really not. The big thing you want to watch out for is the springs on L2 and R2, but they can go right back in. It's kind of hard to actually break the controller, but you can buy replacement batteries on eBay, so that shouldn't be too difficult. I think most people don't give themselves enough credit when it comes to actually servicing something like the controller itself, but these are the things that you really want to watch out for. So in terms of storage options and upgrading the internal drive, this is something where you'll have to consider just how much you're really going to store on the system. Nowadays, you do have to remember, you get a lot of mileage out of storage on PS3. This was a generation that primarily focused on disc playback, so unless you plan on doing a lot of spending on PSN or storing a lot of video files, you really don't have to go too crazy here. Most of the standard drives on a Slim or a Super Slim will be equipped with 120 gigabytes and up, which is fine, but getting up to 500 or more though will give you plenty of space. Keep in mind PS3s can only accept up to 1 terabyte. Any higher and a PS3 might be able to format it, but it will eventually crash, so don't go any higher than 1 terabyte. Other than that, just make sure it's a standard 2.5-inch hard drive, the kind typically for laptops, and you're good to go. Now, as for the option of, say, installing an SSD, this is where some school of thought leads us to think this is naturally a better option. The problem is that a PlayStation 3 and all of its software was not designed to utilize the kind of speeds an SSD can do. There's simply too many bottlenecks preventing a massive improvement to things like load times and installs. Having said that, there are certainly some documented improvements, It varies from game to game, and in most situations, you will see identical performance. Some of the best discoveries sit with install times. As an example, Gran Turismo 5 will install much quicker on an SSD, and when loading races, it can usually cut the loading time in half or close to it. More unique situations could be when a game leans on the internal drive to stream in assets. A while back, Digital Foundry showed that Rage could see some considerable improvements on an SSD. Also, stored files typically load much quicker, so you shave off a few seconds there, avoiding the swirling icons waiting for them to load. That's not bad at all, and it would be great if the speed applied to all the games, but it doesn't. It's more of an exception, not the rule. So you don't have to buy an SSD, but thankfully there's some things to consider. You could get a hard drive or a solid-state hybrid drive with 7200 RPM, and that delivers similar improvements. It's not massive, and it will be slower than the SSD, but still a great option. That, and to be honest, all these drives are pretty cheap nowadays. Even the SSDs. Years ago, the price per gigabyte just didn't make sense. Hundreds of dollars for hardly any improvements. But today, they're not nearly as out of position. So yes, it's cheaper to go with the standard hard drive, you'll get more space for the price, but if you want to swing the difference, which is no longer a major barrier, then go for the SSD. How about them video games, huh? You can't go wrong with PlayStation 3. That's why you're here. And we're not going to do direct game recommendations per se, but we'll talk more broadly about this topic, which is, well, really, if I were buying a PS3 today for the first time, or if I was getting one after not having it for a while, I would put my energy into games that are stuck on PS3, which is not quite the best way to put it, but things where they're only on PS3 in some very, specialized way. So when it comes to first party, I would avoid, say, the Uncharted series, unless you're in a situation where you want a trophy hunt, you're a collector, maybe you're in a second or a third world country, so PS4 still isn't quite cheap enough. But otherwise, I would say, just play the Uncharted collection on PS4, right? That's a game where those are principally the PS3 titles, but they're a higher frame rate, higher resolution. It's not a remake. Those are definitely PS3 games on a PS4. You want to avoid rebuying those on PS3. You want to go for things that are stuck on PS3. So for first-party titles, that would be things like Resistance, Infamous, Motorstorm, Killzone 2 and 3, LBP 1 and 2, Puppeteer. Outside of first party, that would be MGS4, Folklore, 3D Dot Game Heroes. There's probably a lot of obscure JRPGs that are only on PS3, things like that. And some of these can get pretty pricey for their disc, so you might want to grab these before the values climb higher. And assuming you're into consoles, and let's say you don't care about playing on PC, or you don't care about the alternative that's on Xbox, then that would be things like Final Fantasy 13, Grand Theft Auto 4 and the expansions, Red Dead Redemption, The Orange Box, Portal 2, Fallout New Vegas, Dragon Age Origins, things that are still primarily tied to that generation. Now, as for the PlayStation Store, we had a big scare last year when Sony announced the closure, and then they reversed their decision, which is good, but as of right now, it being March 2022, we have no idea how long the store will stay open. Currently, Sony cut off credit card support directly on the PS3, so instead you can top up your wallet from a PS5, a PS4, desktop, mobile, or from PSN cards, which is a minor hassle, but dropping that support implies the store should remain open for a bit longer. Now, with that, the same advice holds. Focus on things that are only on PlayStation 3, as in digital-only titles on PS3. That would be games like Pixel Junk Eden, Pixel Junk Racers, Blast Factor, Infamous 2 Festival of Blood, Pain, High Velocity Bowling, Magic Orbs, Linger in Shadows. There's a lot you could get. Now, if I may, I would like to make a strong case for the PS1 and PS2 classics. For one, PS2 classics can be bought and played on any PS3, so in the likely situation that you have a model without PS2 playback, that's a great option. For PS1, this is really as simple as it being cost-effective and accessible. You can throw $50 at these and walk away with, I'm not joking, hundreds to over 1,000 in value compared to their physical counterparts. That, and you get a lot more mileage out of them. They're all conveniently stored on your PS3. They're small file sizes. Most of them are playable on a PSP and a Vita, and you can use different PSN IDs to access different regions. So Japan, for example, has the largest collection of PS1 classics. So if you love imports, this is awesome. You just have to buy the appropriate PSN card from a site like PlayAsia. The only real issue is we don't know how long PSN will last on PS3. At some point, you won't be able to re-download your purchases, or worse, not being able to sync your system clock with PSN in the event your CR2032 battery dies. At the time of filming, this still has not been fixed. Digital games will not start even offline if that battery dies and you can't re-authenticate with PSN. But for the time being, there's still plenty of good reasons to grab some stuff. Finally, let's go over accessories. There's definitely some cool things you can pick up here. First off, for PS1 and PS2 playback, Sony used to sell a memory card adapter, which would let you copy over save files to continue playing them on a PS3, and you could even say copy them back to the memory card to then use them on a PS1 or a PS2. That was always so neat to me, having that kind of cross-save functionality 15 years ago. The only problem is the memory card adapter is pretty rare now and worth a decent amount. When it comes to the PlayStation Eye and PlayStation Move, there's certainly some cool things worth checking out. There was a brief moment in time where Sony was really trying to make Move a viable option for established AAA games, so there's Move support in things like Killzone 3, SOCOM 4, or Bioshock Infinite. That's when Sony also started selling the PlayStation Move Sharpshooter, or the shooting attachment. There's also games that are geared directly to PS Move, so if you're inclined, then by all means give it a try. There's definitely some fun to be had in Sports Champions, or even Sorcery. The PlayStation Eye by itself actually has some cool stuff too. There's experimental camera titles on PSN like Toriyamaki and Aquatopia. You can also mess around with the free camera software iCreate. This is like a PlayStation version of Mac's Photo Booth. Honestly, my favorite PSI title is perhaps one of the most unique games out there, Eye of Judgment. This was a completely original TCG that uses the camera to read the cards on a playmat, and that summons the monsters in-game. For what is a quirky peripheral console game, I thought this was so dope. And the TCG itself was not bad at all. It's a 9-grid format based on a monopool. Monsters have basic attack power and life. They attack based on direction, placement, and abilities, and the goal is to simply summon 5 monsters and have the turn resolve with 5 monsters remaining. Harder than you think once the board starts to fill up. In terms of other peripherals, there was this ridiculous official keypad that sits above the DualShock 3. If you're still messaging a lot on the console, then maybe I would just use a generic USB keyboard, which the PS3 accepts, that and a mouse as well. If you're still using your PS3 as a Blu-ray player, then it should still be worth grabbing the PS3 Media Remote. Also, if I might add, the SingStar mics are awesome. It's a rare occasion, but every so often using the actual mics to play SingStar is a great time. I've got some really fond memories from playing these games over the years, and PS3 still has a lot of SingStar discs you can buy and play off of, including being able to read and play the songs off the PS2 entries. It's a disc swap feature that all PS3 models support for SingStar PS3 games, so you can play the songs off any of the PS2 ones. Another interesting accessory, if we can call it that, is the PlayStation 3D TV. This was made for a short time where 3D was being heavily pushed, and PS3 also supported a range of 3D games. One of the cooler gimmicks here was a feature where you could play 2-player split screen locally, but the 3D effect made it so you saw your own full screen independently from the player next to you. There's not many of these TVs left in good working order, but something to consider if you're really interested. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful. The description will have more on what we talked about, so additional resources on things like console model numbers, list of games, compatibility, recommended drives, things like that. And if you haven't just yet, consider subscribing for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.